Welcome to A Healthier, Happier You, the people working to make it happen. I'm Evan J. Cholfin from Luxhammer, where we help the brands that help you live healthier. Today, I'm joined by Amy Cowperthwait, founder and CEO of Avkin. Amy's journey from ER nurse to simulation innovator has transformed how we train healthcare professionals. As a certified healthcare simulation expert and co-host of the Simulation Nation podcast, she's dedicated to improving patient safety through more effective medical training. Amy, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited.
Yeah, let's start with the story that sparked everything. You were running a tracheostomy simulation at the University of Delaware when something unexpected happened. Take us through that
Yeah.
moment.
Well, just quickly before that, I was an emergency department nurse, as you mentioned in your intro, and I loved my job in the emergency department, but felt like weekends and nights were getting to me. So when I went back to my alma mater, I had had really negative experiences as a nursing student transitioning into being a nurse. It was really hard to take that where you go just from one patient that you get in clinical to where you have now five or six. And in all honesty, it was actually 12 for me when I first graduated because I was night shift on a med surge floor, and it was very overwhelming. So when the job came available for someone to help run their simulation center, I was really excited because I really saw that as a bridge between what was going to happen in the academic learning versus what was going to happen at the bedside. Now they still only had one patient, but I could really craft those simulation experiences to make them more realistic to the things that they were going to see, or to make it so that I could challenge them and, really write any simulation I wanted. But when I got there, I had these mannequins that were in the bed, and it was like, wait a minute. They don't stare at you. They don't talk back. They let you do whatever they want. And it's just not realistic to what they were going to experience in the clinical setting. And I felt like there were so many limitations that I was really struggling to make it realistic. And again, I'm an ER nurse. So I'm like, okay, well, we'll do a code blue and we'll do an unconscious septic patient, right? Trying to make it so that they didn't really have to interact with the patient much. But at the end of the day, how they interact with the individuals is really, really important. And so I started a program called with the theater department, and it was for standardized patients, which is basically healthy people that are pretending to be sick. And I really loved it. It developed fully. I had gotten a job where now, as a faculty member, I was really doing what we call human simulation exclusively. But the person that been taken over the mannequin simulation basis called me over spring break and basically said, I'm not coming back. No one else knew how to run the mannequins but me. And there was a tracheostomy simulation. So it's basically someone who has a hole cut in their neck that is a breathing tube for that individual. And they can't talk typically. And trach patients have a lot of mucus that builds up in their lungs. And so the management of their respiratory system is super important because that's their lifeline, right? We all have a nose and a mouth. We've got two openings. They only have one. So it's a patient that is actually the scariest patient for new nurses to take care of in the hospital. It was really important that we did that simulation. So I went down to do that simulation while my faculty members that weren't trained in mannequin simulation helped support me with the human simulation because it's a lot easier to run those. And when it happened, nursing students walked into the room and they said, Mr. Jones, what's your name and birthday? And I didn't respond because I wanted them to understand that they can't, right? They can't respond. Well, all of a sudden they looked at each other. There was three of them in the room, and they said, is he dead? Now, the mannequin's chest is rising and falling, but it's not noticeable, right? Because if I'm short of breath, my chest goes up and down, and you could see that increase in, the volume, and you can see that panic on someone's face. But mannequins don't have any of that. So they ran around to the other side of the bed to check a pulse because there was a pulse on one side. And when they did, they were nervous and they pulled too hard on the pulse of the mannequin and they didn't feel it. And all of a sudden, they were doing CPR on Mr. Jones that only needed to be suctioned because he was in respiratory distress. So at that point, said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I knew that the university would probably fire me if I cut holes in my standardized patients' necks or stuck them repeatedly with needles. So I started to think about this idea of having, at the time, the word that I used was overlay, something that went on top of my standardized patients that had all the things in it that I needed. And we now call them wearable simulators. But if you think of the game of operation, they have sensors inside. So if the students are doing something that would cause pain or maybe cause relief from pain or whatever it is, the sensors cue the SP to react and respond at the right time. So with my tracheostomy device, the very first one that we ever created, it would cue them if they took the suction catheter and went down too far into the patient's throat or into their trachea, and they hit the bifurcation of the lungs because it's very painful for a patient. You can imagine just even when you swallow water the wrong way and cough, it's really uncomfortable. Multiply that by about 10 times. They say it feels like a hot poker to the chest. And then there's also a sensor at the faceplate, which is where the tracheostomy enters into this to the skin. That is also a very sensitive area, so that if the nursing students are pushing too hard or they're suctioning too deep, the patient will react appropriately to that care during the experience. So when it actually happened, when the engineering students created that for me at the university, I always joke that it was put together with bubble gum and glue, but it was yoga mats and casting material. But it was as if it was a Walt Disney moment for me, where I had envisioned something that was so sorely needed in the industry, and it came to life. Right. And after I did it, after we created it and we actually started collecting data on it and things like that, I also didn't realize that what I wasn't seeing from the students when I was testing them on the mannequin was if they suction too deeply and they hit the carina or push too hard on the faceplate, how did they react to the patient's reaction? Because I'd
Huh.
never gotten to see that before. And for me as a new nurse, I can remember it was so scary to go into the hospital and take care of that first trach patient. For me, I actually desterilized the suction catheter, which was a no-no, right? And so I could help work with them on that in the debriefing session afterwards, so that they wouldn't have that same experience at the bedside on a patient.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I love the journey. So, what makes your approach unique in the medical simulation space?
Yeah, so I mean, there's multiple modalities in healthcare simulation that are offered. Initially, the main one was what they call high fidelity mannequins. I would argue that they're not high fidelity because they actually don't look at you and talk. They are actually developing things that are more and more sophisticated, but it's still a robot or a mannequin, right? And so the other modality that is out there that is frequently used or integrated is virtual learning, virtual reality. And those two aspects do not include a human. At the end of the day, they are going into the hospital to take care of humans. We're complex individuals. If you think of an iceberg, the things are at the top, the things that we say, the things that we think, the things that we do, that's just the top of the iceberg. Our attitudes, our feelings, our motivations, our past interactions with healthcare, our access to health, really good healthcare. All of those things are underneath that have to be sorted out by healthcare providers. And you can imagine a novice is trying to manage, just is the IV running the right way versus dealing with someone who's now not going to be able to go to their grandson's high school graduation because their osteomyelitis is kicked in again, and they're all of those things that go underneath. I used to always tell my students that they're meeting patients typically at the worst days of their lives and their family, right? People don't say, yes, I get to go and stay in the hospital for a week, I'm really excited, right? So it is that idea of helping them work through the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings that people have, and helping them to support those people in ways that were never dreamed possible with mannequins or even with VR. There is some work out there in VR, but most of the stuff that really separates us is the idea that it is a human. That person can get up out of the bed and walk around. That person can tell you, no, you can't take my blood pressure. That person can do all the things that a patient can do. And now with the wearables, it extends that even into more complicated or invasive procedures. We have a birthing mannequin now. It actually, somebody can wear our product and birth a baby in a simulated experience, in it, whether it's a normal birth and everything goes well, or it's a complicated birth. Like, all of those things really add to the simulation because you're also able to get feedback from the patient about that experience.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, who do you serve best? What's your ideal institutional client?
Yeah, I would say that if I could draw a picture, it is community colleges and nursing schools at universities. That's really our main customers. We have had a lot of interest from health systems, especially after COVID, because the nursing students are not as well prepared when they graduate and they're less comfortable. They're actually, their retention rate of nurses is really declining because they're choosing to leave the profession altogether or move to a different part of the hospital because they're not comfortable where they are. So we are getting all kinds of opportunities in health systems as well. We have had some emergency medical services programs, paramedic programs purchase certain products, right? Like our birthing simulator, where they do a homeless encampment birth, things like that. But by and large, it's nursing programs and a smattering of medical schools, PA, EMS, and then also health systems are now approaching us in droves.
That's great. I'm curious, what's been your biggest challenge in growing Avkin this year?
Well, my biggest challenge in general is that I am coming into this as a nurse. I didn't have any business. I didn't have enough time in my curriculum to take business courses or to understand how business works. And so that really was a huge learning curve for me when we first started, but also each and every year, because as you solve one problem in the business, then you grow and you get bigger, and then you have other problems, and those problems are typically bigger. So learning how to utilize resources and draw on people that have those experiences. I listened to over 250 books on business and women in leadership before we ever got started. But I would say that that's probably, I would say, my biggest, I don't want to say limitation, because I think that there's lots of benefits to me being someone who worked in simulation centers and someone who understands how busy it is and chaotic it is. That's a huge benefit. I'd love to have had one part of my life that was business and one part of my life that was nursing, but that's just not the case.
And you learn so much by doing, I think, too.
You do. And nurses typically do, right? That's, you go into nursing because you're a hands-on person. That's just who we are. But it is, from my perspective, sometimes I feel like I get blindsided of like, oh, profit and loss sheets, balance sheet statements, investors, investment pitches, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think makes it difficult to stand out in the medical education technology market?
Well, because healthcare simulation has been growing year over year. Every time you look at markets, I think is the right name for it. The CAGR is like 26%, 19%. Every year it's growing. And so there are a lot of people in the industry. So there's a lot of noise. And so when we demonstrate our products, we don't need to say anything else. Once we demonstrate it, it's like, that's what it is, because the people that you're working with, the people that are coming to those demonstrations, are experienced healthcare providers. And like, that's clinical care. Right? We actually had a study done. Johns Hopkins and the VA hospital in Durham just completed a study where they studied novice nurses and student stress. They studied their cortisol levels while they were learning. So half of them went to the mannequin, which is kind of the control group. And then the other half was the experimental group with the standardized patient and our wearables. And then they had the same students go to the bedside and they studied their cortisol levels. And what they found was that the cortisol levels of students that learned with our modality was steady. It was even. But the students that learned with the mannequin had statistically significantly higher cortisol levels at the bedside. Again, my drawing of that conclusion is that they only partially learned, it was trach specifically, but partially learned that with a mannequin. And once they got to the bedside and they had a real person staring at them and trying to mouth questions to them or writing down questions, it became overwhelming. So that's really exciting, to see that the study that they have done had the outcomes that you expected. I had the hypothesis that would be true, but I didn't know it. And now we have, objective data that proves that, which is really exciting.
Yeah. So once they see what you're doing, then they get it. But do you think it's the initial awareness that's the challenge then?
I would say up until 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, we just got back from a leading nursing conference, and pretty much everybody that came up to the booth was like, "Yeah, we either have your stuff, or we want to buy your stuff, or no, we know all about an axle or about Avkin." So I would say that the awareness is really much higher. One of the things that we did early on, it came from one of the books that I had listened to. I don't know which one it was, but they talked about the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead did free concerts in the park for years and years to get their following. And then, obviously converted over. Well, what we did very early on, my director of education and myself, who was actually also my daughter, traveled the country, even the world, and did free workshops. We would bring lunch and they would invite people from their simulation alliances or people in their area, and we would talk about standardized patient methodology and how they could do that in an affordable way. I think that really created awareness because it was at a grassroots level. Not everybody can afford to go to these big conferences, but we were in Illinois, we were in Kentucky, we were in Reno, Nevada, wherever, doing these workshops. And I think it created an awareness early on with what we were doing. And also, because I am an SP educator and I'm an expert in it, I still do keynote presentations. I still present at other conferences and things along those lines to get the word out about SP methodology, and also obviously converting that with a wearable technology. But it is something that we were able to do fairly early on. And I think by and large, I mean, again, I mentioned there's like 3,000 to 3,500 nursing schools in the United States. So it's not as if you're trying to reach the masses with, like a business to consumer type model. It's business to business.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you think are the challenges in reaching those folks at scale and being able to get into those places?
It's funny because, again, I mentioned that we were a spin out company from the university that I worked at, and we were put through what they call an I-Core program. The I-Core program basically takes you through everything soup to nuts of what you need in order to get started. And one of the things that they talked about was supply chain. At the time, we didn't have a problem with our supply chain. There was no issues with the supply chain. Everything was fine. And during COVID, it became a hindrance where we were really having a hard time getting things in. And then also you build these relationships with outside vendors, to make the silicone parts and things along those lines, but they're customizing that for us, right? And so it takes some time for them to be able to produce it, to send it to us. We're very, very particular to make sure that it is exactly right. So I would say that that is probably our biggest challenge, is supply chain. It's not necessarily something I'm in charge of, but when there's a problem, as a CEO, you also have to, get in there and help work on it with them. Our team does an amazing job to overcome that. We have a great research and development team that will source things from other places if we can't get it from one place. The tariffs now are painful because, all of that changes. Initially it seemed like it was changing daily, but now it's kind of started to get into that steady state. And, we're having to look for places that are sourcing from certain countries are way higher than others and that kind of thing. But that's not necessarily my everyday job, but it is something that I hear about and, am trying to help on it when I need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, supply chain is always a challenge, and then throw in the tariffs, and that's
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, a challenging mix. So, what are your main growth targets for this year?
This year, what we're really targeting is helping people implement our wearable products, not just in the simulation center, but with role play. Imagine a student wearing the tracheostomy device and another student doing the suctioning in what we call skills lab. So if they don't have standardized patients, they could utilize the products in a really meaningful way, student to student. And what we've heard from our customers is it's actually way improved empathy scores. It's created an understanding from the student's perspective of what it's like to be that patient, right? And what they would want to hear in a certain simulated environment. So, like, people have said things like, I had no idea how long that suction catheter looked when they were putting it down, or I had no idea how close I had to stand to the patient when I was doing that, and how much I'm in their personal space, right? Because as you convert from those social relationships that we have in everyday life all throughout, their early years, when they become and transition into that professional, we have to really get into people's personal spaces and things. And so they're practicing that and realizing how close they are to other people and having to be comfortable with touching people and seeing people and that kind of thing. So I would say that's probably our biggest initiative, is really developing the structure around helping people with that. We had one of our customers that came and talked to us and said that their scores, their board pass rates went statistically significantly higher with utilizing the role play model, as well as their HESI scores, which is like the NCLEX preparation scores, went a lot higher when they utilized the products in a role play environment, which was news to me. So that was really exciting. And we've been able to try to help other schools get that started and going as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really important. So, how are you currently acquiring most of your new institutional clients?
It's really a mix. Again, we're out there beating the drum. We're doing our podcast. We are at conferences. Like I said, we just got back from a conference where we had almost 300 people come up to the booth. Our marketing team does an amazing job to create a buzz, right? So this year we did some fun things at the booth where people who may not have even stopped to hear about Avkin previous were stopping by. We get a large portion of our communications with that. Our team also puts on what we call Sim Summits. And we usually put on 2 or 3 of those a year. And it's very similar to the workshops, but we're there for a longer period of time, typically 2 days. And we also have them present if they want to present some things from their from their school. So that's more of a we're not just bringing lunch. We're coming and really doing the whole thing, promotions all the way through. So we get some connections that way. And then word of mouth is huge right now, where we had people come up to our booth and say, hey, we hear that you guys can help us find funding for your products. And that you basically are experts in where there's possibilities for funding. So we want to talk to you more about that. We love that people are bringing other people to the booth, or that they're contacting us because they heard at a Sim Alliance that Avkin is just like them. One of our board members once said that we're blue collar because we really, really stand out to be we just like them. And I am. I literally identify as a nurse educator and a simulationist before I ever would identify as a CEO. Because that's where my heart is at the end of the day. That's what drives me. And so I think that at the end of the day, word of mouth, just like anything else, right? When you hear from somebody else that, hey, this is a great product and you should be using it. I can't tell you how many people came up to us at the conference. And one of our questions that we were supposed to ask is if they were our customer was, hey, are you using the products? Where are you using the products? And what kind of responses are you getting from your students? And everybody was, yes, we're using the products in skills. We're using the products in simulation. We're using the products in the classroom. Our students love it. They love the experience with the standardized patients. They're taking this and building on that for their clinical experiences. And so it really does a heart good to know that that's what you desired and wanted from the beginning is what's actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious what trends in healthcare education excite you the most?
I think the biggest trend in healthcare education that's exciting to me is the fact that we are looking at the patient from a holistic perspective. And that's something that I mean, if I'm being honest, it was what I learned about in the 80s, right? That holistic perspective. But it's understanding like access to care. It's understanding how there are really big gaps in, especially with birth, the complications for people of color is 2 times that of people that are from a Caucasian background, and nobody knows why. It has nothing to do with education, it has nothing to do with socioeconomic status. So what is it? And again, I think our products really shine with that, because what it does is it really allows those people of color to be in the simulation center and to give feedback from their perspective about what they heard, what they felt, what they thought. So I think that holistic approach, understanding what makes people tick, is a really important trend in healthcare education. I think the other thing is the technology is getting faster and faster. I mean, you look at AI, they're using AI now to help write simulations. We actually tested it here, and I thought it was pretty good. I mean, you obviously have to change it and make it right, but it gives you a good start. And it's always easier to start with something than nothing. The educators of today are having to grapple with, how do we test the student's knowledge if it's no longer writing? Like if AI can write something better or as good as what they could, then it's got to be another way to look at that knowledge attainment, because we want to make sure that they are really walking away with that. Thankfully, that's nothing I have to work with, but I think that technology is exciting and scary at the same time.
Yeah, sure. So what's going to be crucial to get right in the next year?
Avkin is really at a crossroads at the current moment. We are being asked to, as you mentioned, scale in a much bigger way. Normally the third quarter is a little quiet for us because people are on vacation. That's not the case this year. Our manufacturing team is going to be busy, busy, busy all through the year, which is a good thing, right? But it is something where we are having to learn how to scale and how to build the company in a way that is going to be long lasting and sustaining. And I think we've brought on some key advisors to really help us with that, and looking for strategic partnerships and things like that to do more of a global distribution option, because in Europe, every country has a different distributor. It's just a lot to work with, and we have a lot of interest internationally. So we've had to kind of pick and choose where the best places are, but now looking at maybe a potential global distributor that is handling all of those areas.
Yeah, that's exciting. Where are you thinking about moving into next?
As far as products,
Yeah.
if I told you, I'd have to kill you. So I don't want to do that.
Well, how about
But
how
no,
about countries?
you don't want to be killed. No, I mean, again, we're looking at options in the medical market. We met with a man from the VHA SimLearn, which is the simulation center for all of the VA hospitals in the country. And
Yeah.
he mentioned some things to us in the medical market that are a real need. Options to train nurses to higher levels, obviously not out of their scope, but those are things where it'd be almost, if you think of like practice nursing versus academic, it would be higher than what a generalist nurse would learn, but maybe think of like ICU things and things along those lines. So that's what I would say is the big piece of this. The the places that we already have connections with as far as a global market are the ones that are most closely aligned to nursing in the United States. So think of Australia, the UK, the Middle East, things along those lines. But as you expand out, again, Europe is probably the biggest one where we're like, well, we'd love to get into more of Europe, but we have to find distributors that are reputable and distributors that really have an education, because I'm an education, I don't want them just to sell products and not help people. I want them to have that educational aspect to support them as they're getting the products going. So I would say Europe is a piece of it, but then Asia is growing and growing and growing. And the Philippines has a huge amount of nursing schools that support all over the world. They train them to travel. So those are options. We're looking into them. But again, if we're looking at one global distributor, it's not something that we're going to necessarily have to take on ourselves.
Yeah. So if we had this conversation again in 12 months, what would make you feel it's been a successful year?
Growth. Revenue growth is really important, because that means that more people are buying the products and using the products and talking about the products. We're starting to see where there's what I would call hubs of activity, where we have large amounts of users in one area where, again, it starts to be, well, so-and-so is going to choose to go to that school because they have standardized patient methodology and the Avkin wearables. So then so-and-so has to get started with the next one. So we're starting to get those hubs of activity versus, kind of individual customers. And so I would like to say that we have 3 or 4 of those real champion areas versus just champion customers. And we're able to go and do some real good marketing on those pieces of it. I would say that that's the success from the perspective of the CEO, but from the perspective of the educator, that there would be more research out there on our products, and that research would be able to really speak to what we've hypothesized all along. I was invited to be a reader on a dissertation this year, which is to me a huge honor. But she was writing it on SP methodology and on evaluating SPs, and felt as though I was an expert in that area. And I take that I take that as a huge honor. But I think from the education perspective, we as a company also need to be able to support people in this role play modality that is fairly new to us, because as an educator, I never considered it because I had so many SPs with the program that we started with the theater department. But there are programs that don't have a theater department, or maybe they're not interested in working with them, and now they're looking at a role play option. So we want to make sure that we're supporting them with that, with good education and standards of best practice.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, that's it for today's episode of Healthier, Happier You, the people working to make it happen. A huge
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And thank you for sharing your insights and the amazing work that Avkin is doing to help people live healthier, happier lives.
It's not me, it's my entire team behind me, but I stand up and talk about it. I can't brag on them enough.
Well, they're doing great work. Absolutely. Well, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could benefit. And if you're a brand or business making an impact in health, wellness, or personal care, we'd love to help you grow. Connect with me at luxhammer.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay healthy, stay happy, and keep making a difference.